Doug Wead joins us now. He's the author of the new book, Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. And in the lead up to the release of this book, you've been described as the only authorized biographer of President Trump. What does it mean to be an authorized biographer?
You know, I don't think that's accurate. I know it's been said, and I hear it over and over. It's an authorized history, because the biography would tell about his birth and his whole life, and it doesn't do that. It's just about the White House and his election campaign and the history of his first years in the White House.
What does it mean to be authorized?
It means they say, okay, and the president said, what do you want? Who do you want to talk to? So initially, sitting there with the Sarah Huckabee Sanders and Bill Shine when the book started, and the president, I said, I want everybody. I want everybody in the cabinet. Everybody said, good, you can have them all. But once I started interviewing the family members, I couldn't get out of the family. It was too rich, too interesting.
How did you get into that room in the first place? Why did the president pick you for this?
It was a long time. There was a year of debate. I had a meeting with Ivanka Trump, and I said, in 200 years when you're gone and all your children are gone, they'll still be writing books about the Trump family and still theatrical performances. And whether your family's viewed with hatred like the Borgias or the Medicis, or they're celebrated like the Kennedys or Rockefellers, depends on one thing: primary sources. Not anonymous sources, not third party. It's what you say, what your father says, that history will be written. And I would like to write that book. So they debated it for a year, and I mean, I'm the guy that tape recorded George Bush, so there was General Kelly saying, no, you can't let that guy in here.
Why do you think they decided to trust you?
It's the president. I've seen it over and over again. You'll see it in this book. If someone really enjoys doing something, he feels they'll rise to the task, even if they may not be perfectly fitted competently, whether it's building a skyscraper, whether it's putting his daughter in charge of North Carolina in the middle of the campaign, and she has zero political experience. She wanted to do it. He saw the desire. And I think he told me Michael Beschloss, who I think is a great historian, said Michael Beschloss came to Mar-a-Lago right after I won the election, and he kissed my, only Trump could say, for a week. And now he's on TV attacking me, but I feel chemistry with you. So that's what the president said.
When it's authorized, does the president get to read what you write before it's published?
Well, he probably didn't have time to read it, but they get a chance to vet the protocols. They can't dictate anything that I write or say, but they can say, wait, this was off the record, this was on the record. They can also say, this is national security issue. You can't say this, or you can't. So they do have that option. And I want it to be accurate. That was the whole point of the book, is that I want to write something that is really what they said. So I encouraged Don Jr. and Tiffany and Eric and Laura and Ivanka and Jared. I encouraged them, look at the manuscript. Is there something wrong? And they would find mistakes, things that I misunderstood that I heard. But did they dictate? No, I wrote what I wrote.
When were you in the White House? When were you with the family?
Well, it was over a period of the whole 2 years, so it was in and out. I had 3 meetings with the president beginning in 2016, and lots of questions through the kids and through the staff. Met with Ivanka in her office for interviews multiple times in the White House. Met with Jared in his wonderful White House office, which is quite a trip, right in between the chief of staff and the Oval Office. Went to Ivanka and Jared's home in Georgetown for an evening to interview them around a roaring fireplace, which was fun. Went to Trump Tower to interview Eric and Laura. Went out to eat with them and got the tour of Trump Tower. Talked on the phone with all the family multiple times, and got the only interview with Tiffany, the only one she's given since her father was elected president.
Who most interested you and who defied your expectations?
I was surprised by a lot of things about all of them. One of the things that surprised me, usually in most families, there's a smart one and a dumb one and a rich one and a poor one and a lazy one and an industrious one. There's these different characters that emerge in a family. Every one of these Trumps are dynamic, and they all have this positive streak in them. When I quiz Ivanka, she'd say, I refuse to be bitter. I will not be bitter. I choose to be happy. In fact, she said, I can't function if I'm not happy. So I choose to be happy. And each of them were like that. I'd bring up Russian collusion, they'd bring out some silver lining, and including the president.
Doug Wead with us, the book Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. It's the topic of our discussion for the next 50 minutes this morning on the Washington Journal. Democrats can call in at 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. You brought up Jared Kushner already. He comes up on page 8 very early in your book. You end the book with Jared Kushner. There's a lot of references to Jared Kushner in this book. It seemed like he was one that particularly interested you.
Yeah, because nobody had interviewed him, and nobody would get to interview him. So I thought, I got this chance. I'm going to go all the way. I want to know everything. What do you watch on Netflix? What do you eat? How do you sleep on these international voyages and trips you take? So yeah, I did spend a lot of time getting good stuff, I felt, from Jared Kushner. He's very enigmatic, very mysterious guy.
At first, you write, Jared Kushner wouldn't let me record our interviews, forcing me to rely on scribbled notes, but his stories were the biggest of all, told from a couch in his Georgetown home with a crackling log in the fireplace nearby, or told from his office squeezed between the Oval Office and the Chief of Staff suite in the rarefied south hallway of the West Wing. Every story was worth patiently waiting for. My young team was impressed. Quote, you are now actually interviewing Spider-Man. What was most worth waiting for?
Oh, there's so many. I can give you just one. He said to me, you know, I told my father-in-law, Russian collusion is the perfect scandal for you because it's so far-fetched and you're so provably innocent. If they'd created some scandal out of building casinos in Atlantic City or buildings in New York City with building permits, and the public could have been confused and it could have worked, but they chose Russian collusion. Perfect. He also said Russian collusion was a great diversion because he felt they couldn't have turned around the economy. If the media was focused on the deregulation, they would make stories out of the deregulation and they couldn't have turned around the economy. So Russian collusion diverted. That's typical thinking of Jared Kushner.
One of your chapters, the unexpected advantages of the Russia witch hunt, with how it plays into what's happening now when it comes to Ukraine. Explain.
Yeah, by saying he's a Russian agent, I'll stop and think of that just for a minute. The Russians have run him for president and elected him against all odds to be president of the United States, and he's a Russian spy. Think about that for a minute. That's like landing a man on the moon. That's like the assassination of Julius Caesar, like Christopher Columbus. That's one of the greatest events of world history if they were able to actually achieve that. So when it turns out to be untrue, or they can't prove it, it's pretty far-fetched. In fact, I can tell you a story about that. But in any case, now they say, no, Russian collusion wasn't it, but here, this one is really it. It kind of inoculates the president. In a lot of people's mind, they're saying, wait, at least apologize over Russian collusion. Then I'll listen to what you have to say next. But you can't keep this up. So in that sense, it kind of worked to his advantage.
Author Doug Wead with us here to talk about many of the stories that he learned during his time in the White House and with the Trump family, taking your phone calls as well. Again, Democrats 202-748-8000, Republicans 202-748-8001, Independents 202-748-8002. Ed's up first out of Greenbelt, Maryland, a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning, CSPAN. I'm a Democrat, and I believe in the United States of America, and I worked under the State Department at one time, and I swore to protect our country from domestic and foreign enemies. I was under George H.W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, and I believe that we must be bent on the facts and not the fake news and so forth. And half of our country, more than half of our country, is not familiar with the facts. And the Mueller investigation is for real. Climate change is for real also. And look what's happening all over the world in California, and look what's happening to the drought situation. That's very real. And our nation, most of our people are very young, and our children and grandchildren. This is the United States of America. This is not North Korea. This is not Russia. This is not China. this is the United States of America. I feel very strange when this man gets on the number 45 gets on Air Force One. Air Force One is the pride of the United States of America. It's the flying White House. I don't think he should be allowed to do that. I believe that the Congress should take this Air Force One, park it at Vandenberg Air Force Base, and not allow this man to get on it and go abroad.
That's Ed in Greenbelt, Maryland. Doug Wead, what do you take from that?
Well, I agree with everything you had to say, except limiting the president from Air Force One. I, too, worked for Ronald Reagan, wrote his campaign biography, and for George H.W. Bush, served on senior staff in the White House. But when 63 million people vote someone president of the United States, I don't think you should deny that person free speech, or that you should say they can't use Air Force One or they can't represent us. That's what elections are all about. But we have the right to vote for who we want to vote for.
How many presidents have you interviewed?
I've interviewed 6 American presidents.
What defines a legacy for a president?
Well, historians look at almost 120 different things, but primarily the economy and the handling of war and peace. And the economy dominates. I mean, for example, they want to know a president's intelligence. Well, Jimmy Carter may be our most intelligent president. He's got a greater IQ than John Kennedy, but he's ranked poorly as a president because of the economy. George W. Bush is ranked as a great warrior president with the battle in Iraq, the war in Iraq. But he's ranked lately, anyway, as a very poor president because of the economy. He left office with 28% approval rating. So the economy dominates. And that's what works in Donald Trump's favor.
With the House impeachment vote now appearing likely at this point, what will that mean for this president's legacy?
Well, it should. Impeachment normally should be really bad. But again, the Russian collusion thing is haunting. The Democrats would have been a lot smarter if after the election they said, okay, let's unite, and then went after reasons to get rid of him rather than immediately announcing, now, okay, he won, now we're going to impeach him. Because it kind of undercuts their case for impeachment. I'll tell you an interesting story. Jared Kushner told me that the Trump kids, they travel all over the world. And from time to time, right from the beginning, in 2017, they would be pulled aside by a head of state, and the head of state would say to them, please tell your father how sorry we are he's going through this Russian collusion nonsense. Now, when I heard that story, it was like a light switch going off, because I wrote the book, All the President's Children, and when you study the presidency through the eyes of the children, the perspective totally changes. So now I'm seeing this whole Russian collusion through the eyes of the kids. I hear these stories and I think, well, of course, if you're the president of France or the prime minister of the UK, you're not going to wait 2 years for the Mueller investigation. If you're Benjamin Netanyahu, you're going to pick up the phone, you're going to call Mossad, you're going to say, what's this I just read in the New York Times? I've known the Trumps all my life. I want an answer by 6 p.m. tonight. There are 120 intelligence agencies, all the way down to the lowly ASIS, which has a $164 million budget, more than the Mueller investigation. Those countries had to know.
And you think they all did their own investigations?
They all did their own investigation. They had to know. The security of their country's at stake. The economy of their country's at stake. I'm dealing with a Russian spy? I got to know the answer to that. So they knew the answer while we in America waited.
Doug Wead with us, taking your phone calls. This is Pierre in Washington, D.C., independent. Good morning.
Hey, Mr. Wead, good to talk to you. I have 2 things to say. First, I want to correct you on one point. Jared and Ivanka live in Calorama, not Georgetown. Okay, now my question. I know that the nepotism and profiting off the presidency is a problem for the Trump family. They talked about the Biden students, but how did they justify their own nepotism and profiting off the presidency? I will hang up and let you answer the question. Thank you.
Pierre. Thank you, Pierre. Well, you can call it nepotism, but right from the beginning of our republic, presidents have picked their children often to serve in government. In fact, the first president to ever have biological children was John Adams, whose son, John Quincy Adams, served as minister to Prussia. No less than George Washington wrote Adams, his successor, and said, please don't withhold appointment of John Quincy simply because he's your son. When I sat down with Ivanka Trump, the newspapers were saying, oh, this is unprecedented. But she was the 19th son or daughter of an American president to be appointed to work in the White House with the father. Anna Roosevelt ran the White House for FDR. In fact, she ran the Yalta Conference. Her mother, there's a scene in one of my books where her mother, who's the first lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, comes to her daughter and begs to be put on the manifest to go to Yalta. And her daughter says, sorry, Mom, can't do. So this has been going on for a long time. You can call it nepotism. But Pierre, if you become president of the United States, you're going to want people that you can trust, that are loyal to you, and you'll have a tendency to pick people who are closest to you, and often that will be your own family. And it's happened all through history, even in the modern history. They change the laws and say, no, you can't, but the president will put them on the DNC payroll, like Jimmy Carter did his son, or the RNC payroll, like Gerald Ford did his daughter, who was a White House photographer. So that just happens. There's two things a child will do helping the president. One, be loyal, and two, offer continuity. So if you're in the White House and you're working and your boss is Reince Priebus and you got all these great projects going, Reince Priebus is out, all of your projects collapse. There's no continuity. Now it's General Kelly. Then General Kelly's gone. Now it's Mick Mulvaney. But the children remain. They'll always be at the dinner table at Thanksgiving. So what you say to one of the children or one of the relatives will endure. And that continuity is important.
Stratford, Connecticut. Jerry's a Republican. Good morning.
Hi. I wanted to ask how the Trump family deals with two of the nastier falsehoods, because I never really see the tellers of these falsehoods ever suffer any consequences. And the first is this notion that Donald Trump is a racist. And so President Trump goes around saying things like the unemployment rate among black people is at an all-time low, and he takes credit for it. But he's clearly celebrating an increase in prosperity among African Americans. And yet, there's Maxine Waters and everybody else. Donald Trump's a racist. And they never suffer. There's never anybody in the media that says, hey, wait a minute. How do you say that and hold that falsehood teller accountable? And the other, of course, is the Russia hoax. And you would say we've moved past that, but we haven't, because Adam Schiff and here in my own state, Senator Blumenthal, they keep saying publicly and repeatedly they personally have evidence of this crime occurring, although they never actually point the evidence out. But they're never pressed on it when they appear in public. So I just want to ask, how does the Trump family deal with these two very nasty allegations?
That's very interesting, because I write a whole chapter about the women on the bus, the Trump women. They campaigned all over the South. So I go into the detail, these great stories. Eric Trump's closest personal assistant for almost all of his life, and all these other women on the bus. Well, when I'm finished with the book, I want to get a picture of the women on the bus, the Trump women on the bus. Well, guess what? There's 6 women on the bus. 5 of them are African Americans. The only white person on the bus is Laura Trump. So you never heard about it. It was never in the news, and that's why. The only one that ever got any fame was Omarosa, who switched, who changed and turned against Trump. So, yeah, they know it. They recognize it. They see it. The president has great pride in those numbers, because he feels like he's been able to accomplish what Hubert Humphrey wanted to do, what LBJ wanted to do. I mean, 6 million people have gone off food stamps. LBJ gave them food stamps. He gave them subsidized housing. Remember, the police would go around looking to see if there's a man in the apartment. If there's a man in the apartment, they could lose their welfare because they were claiming to be a single mom. So here the father had to be chased out. Someone from the welfare department will be here today. So you had a whole generation of young people raised without a dad. You had increase in crime, which was natural. Trump loves what's happened. He's very proud of what's happened. And it doesn't matter to him if he doesn't get credit for it. At least he says that. So they're on a roll. One night, Jared Kushner came home. I'm doing another Jared Kushner story, John. But one night he came home and his daughter Arabella greeted him at the door. And she had stayed up late. The other kids were in their pajamas and had gone to bed. And she said, she spoke into her computer, Siri, how many people has Jared Kushner gotten out of prison today? And of course, Siri didn't know. And she said, I'll tell you what, 20,000. Up till today, he got out 2. But after today, 20,000. Not bad, Daddy. That was the First Step Act, where most of the prisoners that were released and paroled from prison happened to be African American, but it was nonviolent drug offenses. The Trump family takes great pride in that, whatever people want to think. They take joy in that.
Coming up on 8:30 on the East Coast, Doug Wead is our guest. The book Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. We're talking about it this morning, taking your phone calls. And I want to show viewers the president from Tuesday in the Rose Garden. This was before the pardoning of the turkey, but President Trump talking about what he's thankful for this year and also speaks about living in the White House. This is what he had to say.
This Thanksgiving, we bow our heads in gratitude for the newfound prosperity and spirit that's taking place all across America. The country has never been more successful. Our military has been rebuilt. We captured the number 1 terrorist in the world and killed the number 1 terrorist in the world, al-Baghdadi. And I want to thank our military because there's nothing like our military. I want to thank Almighty God for the shedding His grace on our nation. Our nation is special, and we especially send our love to members of the United States Armed Forces serving all over the world. We're forever thankful for those who wear our nation's uniform and the families who support them. The families are so important. They could never be the same without those great families. Because of their selfless service, millions of our fellow Americans are celebrating another wonderful Thanksgiving in safety and in peace. And just a very special country, a very special place, the Rose Garden at the White House. If you're looking back here, that's the Oval Office. Some of you haven't been here before. But every time we walk onto the grounds of the White House, we realize how special it is.
Doug Wead, pick up on the last part there and the president living in the White House and his feelings about that, and a president who owns a lot of properties around this country.
Yeah, that's very funny. In the Christmas 2018, he stayed in the White House rather than go to Mar-a-Lago, and so he was playing the martyr. He was saying, I'm just going to stay here and work for the country. So the kids are calling him because they all go to Mar-a-Lago. They have all these traditions for Christmas that they love. And they said, Dad, aren't you going to join us? And all the grandkids are there and they all look forward to seeing him. He said, no, I got all this business. I got to work for the country. I got to stay here. So finally, Eric and Laura, they call him up. They say, we're coming back. We're coming back to the White House. We're not going to let you be alone on Christmas. And they said, no, you stay there. Jared and Ivanka call and say, Dad, you can't be alone for Christmas. We're coming. And he opens up to Jared and he says, I own all these properties. I own these homes. I live in these homes. This one's a rental. I'm going to enjoy this one for a while. So he was calling the White House a rental, but he was making the point, I know this isn't going to last forever, so I'm going to enjoy it while I got it. He was also setting up a private moment. He and the First Lady were planning to fool the family and go to Iraq to see the troops on Christmas Day, and they couldn't let anybody know that they were doing that.
To Williamsport, Pennsylvania, Dennis is a Democrat. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I want you to know that your guest almost made me throw up this morning.
I'm sorry.
I about throw up every time I hear them blow that Trump got 63 million votes. Hillary Clinton got 66 million votes, and she is sitting in the White House. And 54% of the people in this country voted against this clown that we got sitting there disgracing the White House every day. This is a guy that bragged that he wouldn't have time to go golfing and spent 24% of the time on the golf course. Have a nice day, and thank you.
Doug Wead, on the president and golfing.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I remember Richard Nixon, after he lost to John Kennedy, he held a press conference, and it's always stuck in my mind. He said, I'm never going to criticize him for going to Florida or going to Hyannisport or for taking time off, because I know what the presidency's like. And the presidency's not, 9-to-5 job where you come into an office. It's decision making, and those decisions bear on you no matter where you are or where you go. So I don't see it as a big crisis personally.
Wherever the president goes, his Twitter handle isn't far from him. What are your thoughts on the president and his Twitter habits?
Well, my thoughts don't matter, because if I was advising him, he never would have been elected president. So what do I know? I do think that his communication is transformational. I think he's gone somewhere that you can't come back from, and that will always be a tool for future presidents. It's pretty amazing. It's direct communication with the people. And while it's crude and it's got rough edges, it's comforting in a way. I worked for multiple presidents, and I knew many of the presidents. They're very careful about what they say, presidential. And George W. was very fascinating. Great sense of humor, wonderful guy. But you'd talk to him, and you'd ask him a question, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and he'd grunt, he'd moan, he'd roll his eyes, he'd nod. You had to figure out what to do. If you're wrong, you're in trouble. If you're right, you may get rewarded, but he's not going to tell you. But nothing he ever said could be brought before an impeachment inquiry, because he could just say, I didn't say that. I just smiled. You can impeach me for smiling? So I think it's kind of refreshing. It's scary. It's a high wire act. But I kind of like the fact that he's not a politician. He's got rough edges, and he's telling us what he thinks.
On the line for Independence, this is Dominic out of New York. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. You know, first of all, I'd like to know your guest's opinion on the economy. And one other thing, I got a 92-year-old man who says the image that he'll never forget is Trump crossing over the DMZ into North Korea. And he's powerful, especially for that age group. You know, now that the people, the MIAs are coming home, he stopped that guy from bombing. I mean, he goes where no one else would go. I mean, and I think the economy's doing great. I'd like to hear your opinion. And have a great day, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you, too. Yeah, I mean, you can't knock the numbers. The numbers don't lie. It's pretty miraculous what's happened. For example, we have 7 million unfilled jobs. That's the population of the state of Indiana. It's pretty amazing. And when I hear comedians on TV say, I wish we'd have a recession, like, we get used to peace and prosperity. We get used to it. But when you don't have peace and you don't have prosperity, I mean, Herbert Hoover, I think the American media would love Herbert Hoover. He's brilliant. He was courtly, very careful with what he said. Very presidential. He was an engineer. His 2 sons were scientists, engineers. He was compassionate. He fed Europe after World War I when they were starving. But he led us through this Great Depression. And to give you just a picture, Hooverville sprang up near the major cities of America on the garbage dumps. These were people who could not keep their housing. So they went to the garbage dumps where they looked for scraps to build their own huts, and where they looked for food for their children. There was no sewage, there was no running water. There were thousands of these Hoovervilles all across the country. That's how people suffer when the economy goes bad. So it's kind of fun, I guess, if you're famous and you're rich and you're a comedian, to say, we need a recession, because you want your team to win and you want to win the White House. But actually, prosperity is a wonderful thing. 6 million people have gone off food stamps. That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing.
Lynn from Massachusetts wants to know if you had to sign a non-disclosure agreement in writing this book.
Hi, Lynn. No, I didn't. And that was amazing. That's why they debated it for a year. And that's why there were people in the White House opposed to the idea. When finally the dam broke, they said, come on in. You can have whatever you want. I thought
there were no standing ground rules as you went about this?
No ground rules, except if they'd say off the record or on the record. But as it turned out, hardly anything was off the record. So I went with it. I thought, hey, if they're going to open the door, I'm going through it.
The book, Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency. Doug Wead with us for about the next 25 minutes this morning. This is Steve in San Jose, a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning, Doug. Thank you for making your appearance on the show. I think you're pretty level-headed and fair in your opinions. I'm going to make two quick statements, and I would like your reaction. With the ease that President Trump turned this economy around, it appears to me that the answers and how to do it were there all along for everybody, Republican and Democrat, to see for many years. However, the Democrats chose not to do it. The Democrats, it appears, measure their success with the amount of people they can put on welfare and government assistance, while the Republicans measure their success with the amount of people they can put to work. And the last thing I want to say is this is also applicable to our school system. It is not in the best interest of the Democrats to educate our children to where they can all get great jobs as doctors and lawyers and engineers and fire science and police officers, because if they can get good jobs, they will not need the assistance that the government has to offer to buy their votes. What is your opinion on my statement?
Steve, I agree with your statement and more. I spent 40 years in the Republican establishment and came to the conclusion that the Democratic establishment, the Republican establishment, they're both owned by great multinational companies with links to China in more recent years. And when I say owned, there's mutual advantage, and that it's all about money. For example, when I worked in the White House, we were passing regulation, and almost all regulations drive out the competition of the big monopolies. The big companies can afford regulations, and they'll make the changes and pay the money. It's worth it to them, because the small companies, and you, Steve, if you're wanting to start your own business, you can't do it because of the mountain of regulations. Once those regulations pass, they get their monopoly, and then there's a recession. So whether it's Democrat or Republican, they pass a stimulus bill. For example, the stimulus bill under Barack Obama, which was passed by Republicans and Democrats, is more than 1,000 pages long. It means it's the size of the Bible. What it means is nobody ever read the stimulus bill. They read their part, their 12 pages, their 15 pages. They wrote those 15 pages, said to the senator here, this will help, this will help. The idea of the stimulus bill is to help during a recession when the economy's down. But what they effectively do is gut the regulations. So first they get the regulations passed that you have to keep, and you can't even start a business because there's so many of them. Then when there's a recession, they get freed from those very regulations. They don't have to keep them either in order to create jobs. The name of the game is money. And in the last few years, we've seen the largest transfer of wealth in world history outside of the Middle East from the United States middle class to China. And Donald Trump is taking that on. It's an outrage to many people. Many multinational companies don't like him. Those companies own media. They own the companies that advertise on media, pay the bills on media. They own the companies that provide the money for the think tanks, for the pundits that go on the shows like me right now. They usually get paid from a think tank that gets donations from these very companies. And Donald Trump has come in, he's broken the dishes, he's turned over the tables, he's shattering the glass, and they're outraged, but it has turned around the American economy.
Joe on Twitter has a question for you. What's your view on why the president won't reveal his taxes? Joe says, I think it's only fair that we can see them.
Yeah, I have no idea why. I remember in the campaign, the 1988 campaign, I got to be careful here because there were a lot of dirty tricks in the 1988 campaign, but there was a big push to get the medical records of Kitty Dukakis, Governor Dukakis' wife's medical records. And so the GOP spread all kinds of horrible rumors, and they were defenseless because they couldn't, for whatever reasons, release these medical records. So there's probably a story behind the story, and my guess is we'll eventually find out. It could also be a red herring, knowing the president. It could be something that he's hiding, keeping close to the chest, and when it comes out, there'll be disappointment.
Bradenton, Florida, this is Barney, a Democrat. Good morning.
Yes. Seems like Trump paid too well, man. You lie just as much. Seems like you tell much falsehood as Trump do. I was sitting there, you telling me about the blacks on the bus. What happened to the boy? If the blacks was on the bus, why you don't see them in the public? You understand what I'm saying, man? You see, I'm kind of like the other cat was telling me about. You kind of make me want to throw up, man.
That's Barney. Another question about the president and his relationship to the African American community.
Yeah, I don't know what to tell you, Barney. They didn't hide who was on the bus. They went all over the country holding rallies and trying to get attention for it, but they weren't given any attention for what they were saying or doing. And all I can tell you is the numbers, as small as they may be, are actually up among African Americans supporting the president. So there's some who support him and have increased in their support of him. All I can say is he's very proud of the fact that unemployment is down, it is record lows for African Americans. He's happy about that. He likes it, and he's thrilled by it. And he's thrilled by the young men who were allowed out of prison who had nonviolent crimes and were being held in prison. And he's happy about that. That's all I can say.
You've written an entire book about presidents' children, and you have a chapter in this book on each one of the president's children. Talk about the two that aren't in the public eye as much, Tiffany and Barron.
Well, Barron went into the White House as a young man, 10 years old. He's going to come out as a grown man. And he's the stories in the book about Barron are really cute. For example, the second night after the inauguration, they're in the state dining room. The adults are all having this quiet time together. The nightmare is over, they think, and the inaugural balls are over. Everything's done. And meanwhile, the 8 grandkids, now there's 10, they're racing through the state floor. They're screaming and laughing. They're playing a rousing game of hide and go seek. They're hiding behind drapes in the blue room, underneath chairs in the red room. And Barron is supervising, Uncle Barron. He's their favorite. So he tries to find them. Well, in the state dining room, there's a big exclamation going on among the adults. Barron comes rushing into the state dining room. He's huffing and puffing. He's sweating. He's saying, what? They say, Barron, Laura has just told us she's pregnant. He said, oh, okay. And then he races off. He's got things to do. Find kids hiding in the East Room now. So it's just cute to hear his story. Now he's grown into a man. Tiffany goes to the White House every weekend. She loves to see him play soccer, and she had not been close to Barron. Now they're really close buddies. And so it's interesting to see them as children. They have to survive all of this.
What does Tiffany do now?
Tiffany is going to law school, Georgetown Law. And of course, all of this has changed her life completely. She grew up in California. She grew up in Georgia. She was one of the most interesting to interview because of that. So she hadn't lived in New York. So she has a perspective on the New York Trumps. And after she gave her speech at the RNC, she was instantly a celebrity. Before that, she'd walk all over the streets of New York where she was working. She could no longer do that, couldn't take the subway. Everything ended after she gave her speech at the RNC. Now she goes weekends to the White House. But she had great stories. For example, the night they all went to Buckingham Palace, the Trump kids, there was no carriage with 6 white horses. There was no motorcade to take them to Buckingham Palace. They had to make it themselves. So here's all the Trump family with their big gowns and their tuxedos. They rent a van bus, the kind that will take you to your Avis rental car at the airport, and they pile in with all their dresses and gowns and tuxedos and say, take us to Buckingham Palace. So Tiffany's got some great stories to tell.
Michelle is next, out of Schenectady, New York. Independent, good morning.
Yes, good morning, Ethan. Good morning, John and Mr. Wead. If you have 7 million jobs listings and you're not hiring and training people for them, that's not real job growth. It's temporary. The economy is only doing well now because the Republicans have borrowed trillions of dollars to build a fake bubble economy. It's like 2006, 2007, all over again. They lifted sequestration, and history will show that the only reason why this presidency is doing better than the Obama presidency is because Republicans have stymied Obama with the sequestration in 2010, forcing the American people to suffer and build a slow economy. The omnibus bill, which was bipartisan because we bailed out the banks and everyone else, had a lot of energy and renewable parts to it that actually build up the economy, and it's still building it today. Even Governor Grover Norquist, the other day had on, he stated that they misled the Tea Party to focus on the deficit and fight for sequestration.
Michelle, got your point. Doug Wead, more on the economy.
Yeah, Michelle, very, very good points, and it's very complex. And sometimes these arguments cancel each other out. For example, there are some who say there is no economic recovery, and it's an illusion. And there are others that say there is, but it's Barack Obama who caused the economic recovery. And sometimes they say both things in the same sentence. So we're still tribal. We still have our favorites. But I see it after 40 years in government as a racket. I mean, one company gets interest-free money from the Federal Reserve, doesn't even go through a bank, comes direct from the Federal Reserve to that company. Another company doesn't. One company gets federal money and is subsidized by federal money. Another one doesn't. One has to keep the environmental regulations. Another one is exempted from that. It's very unfair and arbitrary, and it's based on lobbying. And that's why I'm enjoying Donald Trump's ride, because he's messing all that up. As to some of these jobs, you can't credit all these jobs to Barack Obama. But for example, he didn't approve the XL pipeline, so there's 160,000 jobs that he wouldn't have had. So there are differences between Obama and Trump, but there are good things to say about both of them.
Stephanie in Michigan wants to know what your experience was compared to other books about what's happened in the White House, saying, I'd like to know if you saw the chaos that was described in Fear, Bob Woodward's book, and Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury.
The answer is yes. I saw the chaos, but I had a different take on it. I went in suspecting that a lot of this chaos was calculated. And I did that because I worked in the White House for George H.W. Bush. And so much of what we did was calculated in the media. I'd go out to eat with some of my best friends who were journalists. They couldn't believe that some of the things we did were actually calculated, but they were. It was spy versus spy versus spy versus spy. It just, when you think you got the story straight, there's a politician who's manipulating it. So I went in the White House suspecting it's not going to be exactly what it appears to be, and boy, was that an understatement. I came out thinking almost everything's calculated, and Sun Tzu once said, out of chaos comes opportunity. I'll give you one example. NATO. Donald Trump blew up NATO. The media was furious. These are our best, this is our greatest treaty. This is our oldest treaty. Look what he's doing to this treaty. And the governments of Europe were campaigning and talking to the American media and all bad-mouthing Donald Trump. The generals came in, and Trump actually impersonated the generals. They had meetings with him, and they'd say, "Sir, these are our friends. The NATO, they're our friends, sir." And Trump would say, "Well, if they're our friends, why are they not keeping their word? Why do they sign a document and say that this % of their GDP will go to defense and our middle class have to pay for it? Why should our middle class build high-speed railways in Germany? Why should they pay for new airports all across Europe when they're descending into poverty? That's not a friend." "Yes, they're our friends, sir." So he blew up NATO, and the end result was NATO got back to business. They agreed, once again, they would meet their obligations. He raised $100 billion from NATO. Remember, his wall with Mexico would cost $1.6 billion. He raised $100 billion from NATO. It is stronger than it's ever been. The head of NATO loves Trump. That's the end result of his chaos. You blow it up, then you rebuild it. I could say the same thing about NAFTA. So there is a reason behind some of the outlandish things that seem to be happening.
Staying in Michigan, this is Teresa, a Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm wondering what you think about all the corruption in the White House. I mean, I'm hearing somebody calling about the Russian hoax. That's not a hoax. As a matter of fact, William Barr's been implicated. Mike Pompeo's been implicated. And the reason Donald Trump doesn't want to turn over his taxes is because he's been getting Russian money for the last over a decade, and he doesn't want the American people to know that he is working with Russia, and everything he does has been helping Russia.
Teresa, can I ask you, since you're calling in on our Republican line, did you vote for Donald Trump in 2016?
I did vote for him, and I am terribly sorry, America, that I voted for him, because this is the most corrupt. I mean, there's so many things your people have said, and you don't even correct them. You just let them keep on going and spewing out lies. This is not a Russian hoax. Donald Trump is the most corrupt president we've ever had.
Got your point, Teresa. Doug Wead to Teresa.
Hi, Teresa. Well, I mean, if you think Donald Trump's a Russian spy, okay, more power to you. But it gets very, very complicated. For example, Bernie Sanders has defended Venezuela, the socialist government. Venezuela has Russian troops on the ground in their country, defending and protecting. They have Cuban bodyguards protecting Maduro. They have Tu-95s, jets, Russian jets, based in Caracas, capable of delivering nuclear weapons to the United States. If you're going to talk about Russian collusion, I mean, you had the Clinton Foundation receiving $145 million from Russian oligarchs. So all through American history, there have been these accusations. They said Thomas Jefferson was a French spy, that the French owned him. They said John Adams was a British spy, that the British owned him. I don't see it. I'm sorry. As I said, if it happened, if Donald Trump is a Russian spy, it will be one of the most incredible events in all of world history, greater than Columbus crossing the Atlantic. It will be really something, but I doubt it. History is going to blow away all the anonymous. They're going to look for primary sources. They're going to look for what the president said, and they're going to look for evidence. If he's a Russian spy, who recruited him? When did they recruit him? Why did they have him modernize the American nuclear deterrent? Why did they have him increase the military defense budget? Why did they have him try to block and stop the socialist takeover in Venezuela? Why is he doing all these things? Why did he increase the number of oligarchs to receive sanctions in Russia? So if he's a Russian spy, they're doing a pretty bad job of running him.
Just a few minutes left with Doug Wead. The book, Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency, his newest book that's out. And we'll try to get to as many of your calls as we can in the time we have left. This is Trent, staying on that Republican line. Monroe, Louisiana, good morning.
Hi. I ate too much and drank too much, so I'm sorry. I'm
Me too.
not on my best good game here. Doug, I think you've had 40 years of it being very close to Washington and to the Christian conservative movement, and I'm very interested in the Christian side of all of this. And speaking of Sun Tzu, you mentioned a minute ago, and the Clausewitz, I think they both said that, to the effect that the greatest generals know how they're going to win their war before the first soldier puts his foot on the ground. And I'm wondering, with your experience with the Christian right and all of the maturity that's come to the Christian political thinkers of the last 40 years, do you see us being a much more powerful? Do you see a tipping point coming now around the world where you have the possibility of a mature Christian church around the world that could begin to take the lead in developing something that I've begun to call a new world order based on Christian biblical ethics? And
we got the question, Trent.
Yeah, I don't know, Trent, if I'm capable of answering that or qualified to answer that. I know that the president had a spiritual side to him that kind of shocked me. He sent me a list of names of people from the White House to interview, and one of them was Paula White, his friend, who's a pastor in Florida. And I did learn the story that his father loved Norman Vincent Peale, the positive preacher in Manhattan. And as a little boy, he would take Donald Trump to that church. So he grew up loving Norman Vincent Peale. He was upset when he died, and he got a lot of inspiration from him.
To Cornell, out of Waterford Works, New Jersey, Democrat, good morning.
Good morning, John. First of all, Donald Trump, his first 100 judges appointed, he appointed 98% white, 1 Hispanic, and 1 African American. Secondly, you speak about his children in the White House. it's illegal for his daughter and son-in-law to be in the White House in the first place. They couldn't even get security clearance, and he pushed it through. Thirdly, you speak about the Republican Party, that $2 trillion tax giveaway to the top 1%, and you're bragging that they took 6 million people off of unemployment. And earlier, the statement you made about that they gave blacks food stamps, that's a racist statement in itself. The problem with the Republican Party is, and even with in the last 50 years, black home ownership is at the lowest in over 50 years. And you know who had a big part of that? Steve Mnuchin. Steve Mnuchin is in his cabinet. You talk about black people being on the bus? What about in his cabinet? His cabinet is the wealthiest, whitest cabinet in America. And the key to it is what I said about 98 of those judges were white and one African American and one Hispanic. And you're telling me about,
Got your point, Cornell. Doug Wead.
Yeah, Cornell, that's food for thought. I'll have to research that and see how right you are on that. I can just say this, Cornell, you can Google billionaires and their support. You'll see in the last election, the billionaires supported the Democrat Party 20-1. Every former president voted for the Democrat Party. The establishment was overwhelmingly Democrat. 419 newspaper endorsements to 19 for George W. Bush. All of academia, all of Hollywood, totally supported. And when Donald Trump became president and announced he was going to have a GDP of 3, he was scorned by every major economist in the world. 100%. There wasn't one who broke and said, I think he could do it. 100% against him. And it worked, and he did it. So the economy, the growth of the economy is good for all of us, regardless of our race. And the Supreme Court nominees, it's not an easy task, and a lot of people feel he's done good. In the past, the Republicans would get one, the Democrats would get one, and sometimes the Republicans would give the Democrats another one. My president did. He appointed a liberal because a lot of the liberal ideas were not winning at the ballot, and they needed help in the judiciary, and this president didn't. He was elected by conservatives and libertarians, so he's appointing them to the Supreme Court.
Time for maybe one more phone call. This is Jay out of Jacksonville, Florida, an independent. Good morning.
Hi, Jay.
Yes, good morning. I wanted to make a couple of comments and a question. The gentleman here seems like a nice guy. I don't know him, but then, I don't know most historians. This is the thing, though. I think that one of the overriding things that the Trump presidency will be known for, among other things, is just the constant, overwhelming amount of lies. Lies about things big, lies about things small, lies about things in between. Obvious lies, too. Tons and tons of them. Starting before his presidency began, continuing to this day, even picking up, according to the experts, to this day. And, I know the first thing that the Trump apologists will say is that, well, hey, Obama lied. He said, if you like your doctor, you can keep him. Hey, Bush lied. Hey, Lincoln lied. Hey, George Washington lied. They all lied. So it's all about the same thing. It's all about even. Of course, a good historian will know, though, of course, that mathematically speaking, not just my opinion, but mathematically speaking, the volume of lies that this president has told is far, far superior than any other one in my lifetime, for sure, probably in the history of the whole country. So I wanted to know if this gentleman, as a historian who knows facts or whatever from history and should have some relative idea of the amount of lies that presidents have told, does he realize that this President Trump is on a pace that far, far outstrips any other one that I can think of?
Jay, got your point. I want to give Doug Wead the final minute or two.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Yeah, I don't have all the answers, but You mentioned several lies that past presidents had told, and you can go all the way back to Eisenhower and the U-2 incident, and it's true, and they're all famous lies, but you couldn't mention one. You said there are hundreds, thousands of lies that Trump has told, but you can't mention one. I can mention a lot of lies that are very clear that have been told about him, that he's a Russian agent, for example, recruited by Putin himself. I saw a lie made from a reporter of one of the largest newspapers in the world that said his wife was a prostitute, that his son was autistic. I saw another comedian on TV promoting the hashtag incest related to this president. I think they've been pretty good at maintaining their dignity, their kindness to people, and I'm thankful on Thanksgiving weekend that we have peace and prosperity, however it happened. If you think it was luck, fine. If you think Trump did it, fine. But thank God we've got peace, and thank God we've got prosperity.
And we appreciate your time this morning. Doug Wead, the author of Inside Trump's White House, the real story of his presidency, out now. Come back again.
Thank you.